Well, a somewhat new way to make a little video is to take this well-known book and just read through the Appia chapter because I'm crazy with these Appias like that, and then finding pictures and stuff on the internet and making it into a video. Let's see how that goes. So early in 1953, production of the Aurelia, the Aprilia's replacement, was in full swing. However, the tiny 903cc Ardea was also due to be replaced. So the Turin works were extremely busy at this time, as they not only had to concentrate on the next small car, the Appia, but also on the next generation of racing cars. Vittorio Jano and his team must have been especially hard worked, as they had to find time to design the Appia engine as well as look after his competition work. All this frenetic activity bore fruit in April 1953, when the Appia made its press debut. From that first appearance, everyone seemed to be as impressed with this little car as they had been with the Aurelia 3 years previously. Although the concept of a front-mounted V4 engine driving the rear wheels via a live axle was as before, the Appia differed completely from the Ardea. Of most significance was the new engine, which had lost the traditional Lancia overhead camshaft design for the V4. Instead, two low-mounted camshafts operated the inclined valves through long push rods, one camshaft being reserved for the intake side and the other for the exhaust valve operation. Complex intake and exhaust porting integrated within the aluminium cylinder head casting was retained. As a result of the very narrow V-shaped block, 10 degrees, and a short crankshaft with only two main bearings, held by two castings screwed into the crankcase, this was one of the shortest V4s ever built, though it was rather tall. A bore and stroke measuring 68 by 75 millimeters produced 1090 cc, exactly the same capacity as the contemporary Fiat 1100. Initially, Lancia had tried dimensions of 65 by 68 for 903 cc, as in the Ardea, and had also considered 955 cc from a bore and stroke of 65 by 72 millimeters. Another experiment achieved 987 cc via a square bore and stroke of 68 by 68 millimeter. For the chosen 1090 cc production unit, a modest 38 horsepower at 4,400 RPM nevertheless allowed quite a lively performance. The engine had white metal connecting rod bearings, while the crankcase offered only a gauze oil filter. Along with the Aurelia, the Appia engine pioneered for Lancia the facility of removing cylinder heads without disturbing the valve timing. The cast iron cylinder block could be removed from the aluminium crankcase, a useful feature since the camshafts were located in this area. The transmission was well made, but not startling. A simple 4-speed gearbox had synchromesh on second, third and fourth gears and transmitted power to the rear wheels via a single-piece prop shaft and high-point gear differential. The Appia's new body retained the principle of pillarless construction. It was a true monocoque of all-steel construction incorporating the platform chassis, and the structure extended from immediately behind the radiator over the roof to the rear of the boot. It gave the Appia an extremely stiff body, the lack of center pillars being compensated for by the bulky door pillars and rear quarter reinforcements, as well as a high transmission tunnel. To save weight, the initial run of Appias had aluminium doors, bootlit, rear wings, bonnet and even bumpers. And in this form the car weighed only 820 kilogram. Thanks to styling, which integrated the wing line into the body, the Appia C10 looked even more up to the minute than its big brother, the Aurelia B10. Lancia patented sliding pillar front suspension was retained, and to achieve a more even weight distribution, a spare wheel and battery were placed well back in the boot. There was little new to distinguish the Appia interior, though the column gear change and two-spoke steering wheel in white plastic showed it belonged to a different generation from that of the Ardea and Aprilia. Rear passengers enjoyed plenty of legroom, and cloth upholstery was standard. The Appia introduction brought Lancia even more publicity than the debut of the Aurelia. All the comments were much the same and positive, and press and public judged it to be a fine combination of comfort and sporting appeal in a little car, all at the relatively modest price. In fact, the Appia cost £780 without taxes, so the cost was not all that modest. The Appia had such an impact on the Italian market that several hundred orders were placed before the car's introduction, although export sales were to be modest, perhaps because of some early technical shortcomings. During a 3-year lifespan, the first series was changed in many respects. After a few thousand engines had been produced, the gauze filter was replaced by a full-flow filter. A high ratio for the quick and direct steering was specified. Several modifications were made to the transmission, and the aluminium bumpers and hubcaps were replaced by chrome-plated parts. Approximately 20,000 of the Appia first series were made before the introduction of a second series. Increasingly, a first series Lancia was judged to be the purest interpretation of the original design, but it was not the most refined. Although in layout the second series was similar to its forerunner, Lancia had made so many changes to the car that it requires describing all over again, because in effect it amounted to a new car, although based on the original design concept. The story begins with the engine, which was given a new cylinder head casting and a new layout for the rocker arms and valve gear, while down below, Vandervelde thin-wall shell bearings replaced the original white metal type. Another change was to the cable-operated starter, which was abandoned in favor of full electrical operation. Different engine timing complemented a new carburetor and allowed an extra 5.5 horsepower, and a redesigned gearbox and revised ratios and new external castings. So the improved engine was not interchangeable with the earlier type. The clutch was strengthened and a new final drive ratio adopted to suit the fitment of a 14-inch instead of 15-inch diameter wheels. The bodywork was styled afresh too. A slightly longer wheelbase supported a car of less aesthetic character with clearly separated boot and lower grille. Inside, the very comfortable bucket-type seats of the first series had given way to a bench arrangement. But the change to a padded dashboard with 2 round instruments was an improvement, offering more information to the driver than the previous small white instrument panel. After all, the alterations of the second series Appia was a big improvement, combining the original concept of the first series, including the grille theme, with the refinement of a later third series. Technically and visually, the Appia second series was a model that stood or fell on its own merits. In fact, it was probably the nicest Appia of the 3 series. The second series brought Lancia further fame, the Appia being rated as a sporting yet reliable car of quality. the important Italian magazine Quattro Ruote drove their Appia nearly 160,000 kilometers throughout Italy without problems. And after their report was published, sales of the Appia increased rapidly. Introduced at the Geneva Motor Show of 1959, the third series had a lot in common with its immediate predecessor. Externally, it had a rectangular grille, a characteristic of the Lancia years ruled by the new owner, Carlo Pesenti. The new grille made the car a little dull frontally, but with power increased to 48 horsepower, the third series Appia was one of the fastest in its class at nearly 135 kilometers per hour. Including features such as split system brake in 1959, the third series Appia became a very desirable little car. It met with tremendous sales success in Italy, and the export figures were better too. More than 99,000 Appia Berlinas were sold between 1953 and 1963, of which some 55,000 were third series saloons. It did not stop at nearly 100,000 Appia saloons though. The Appia Berlina may be the best known model, but Lancia made nearly 8,000 special Appias in 12 models, beginning in 1954 when the factory introduced a small van, a pickup truck and an ambulance chassis, these types being the C80S, C83S and C86S. Mechanically, they were based initially on the first series cars, but to be made suitable for more rugged duties, many modifications were made, aside from their special bodies. The engines were detuned, but thanks to a low axle ratio and the 5-speed gearbox, they could tow almost anything. Big 16-inch diameter tires under pronounced wheel arch flares characterize these Appia commercials, which shared the changes made to the second series Appia in 1956. Initially, the Jolly Van used Appia mechanical components, but it differed in so many respects from the original design that we cannot really call it an Appia. In 1956, the well-known series of special-bodied Appias emerged. As derivatives of the second series saloon, Lancia first built just 14 platform chassis for coach building purposes and called them 112.00. These were more or less prototypes and had standard second series engines. Some of the established coach builders produced nice one-off bodywork for them, notably to the designs of Alemanno, Michelotti and Pininfarina. Some people inside Lancia had even considered developing a scaled-down version of the Aurelia B20 Coupe based on Appia mechanicals, but although some design renderings were made by Pininfarina, this was turned down by the management. Of those 14 prototype chassis, 5 were modified into the next 112.01 model, these all receiving a floor gear change to be used on the forthcoming Coupe, Convertible and GTs, and a more powerful 53 horsepower engine. Ghia, Buono and Cuomo were responsible for dressing these 5 examples. Definitive production of the specialized coach builders Appias began from chassis number 1015, and output included a Pininfarina Coupe 2+2, a Vignale Convertible and, following some peculiar prototypes, a Zagato-bodied Appia GT. In 1959, the introduction of the third series saloon was accompanied by a third series chassis as well, although initially it kept the original numbering because mechanical changes were too few to justify another identification. Thus, the new 812.01 prefix was used again for the Vignale Convertible and Pininfarina Coupe, the latter now mainly built by Viotti, after Pininfarina had ceased production due to lack of production capacity, plus the Zagato-bodied version now called GTE. Between 1959 and 1960, the 812.01 chassis numbering sequence became mixed up with 878 examples of the .02 chassis, which was slightly modified to carry the heavier 4-seat Vignale Lusso body. And as if that were not complicated enough, from 1960 onwards, the .01 series chassis was split up into the type .03 for the convertible and GTE, and the .04 designation was brought in to serve the Pininfarina Coupé, still being built by Viotti. In both cases, the new type number was to indicate specific reinforcements made to the chassis for the various body styles. Viotti also made 300 examples of the Appia two-door Giardinetta to their own design on a chassis carrying a type .21 identification. Finally, in 1961, the type .05 turned up for the shorter wheelbase Appia Sport with Zagato bodywork, a car powered by a 60 horsepower engine in place of the regular 53 horsepower example. Development of the Zagato Appias is a story in itself. At first, the Milanese firm had built an odd prototype with the so-called double bubble roof and a radiator grille in the Lancia tradition. This unique debutante was followed by the Appia GT, still with the double bubble roof, but with headlamps under plexiglass and a pair of small, sharp fins at the rear. The bodywork details of these early Appia Zagatos seem to vary with each one built. But after nearly 30 such individual cars had been made, the final GT made its bow, and altogether about 150 of the early Appia Zagato GTs were made before the GTE appeared. The E in this instance standing for Esportazione. This car was more luxurious than the original, but the bubble roof had gone. Until this point, all Zagatos had the 53 horsepower engine and the 2.51 meter wheelbase. The Appia Sport of 1961 had a shorter 2.35 meter wheelbase, and the engine was operated to 60 horsepower. So aside from the first prototype, Lancia sold 3 basic types of Zagato-bodied Appia. The GT with the double bubble roof, and sometimes with those fins, the GTE, and finally the 160 km per hour Sport. But if one counts variations, it is possible to discover 6 versions, mainly because during the production run, Zagato changed from the recessed and plastic-covered headlamps to ordinary vertical lights. Although official participation in motor racing was banned at Lancia in 1955, there were many Lancia owners competing in hill climbs, rallies, and races with their Appias during the late 50s. Initially, the Appia was often seen racing, even the saloon versions appearing in bigger events like the Mille Miglia. In 1957, when the Targa Florio was run as a regularity event for small saloons, Piero Taruffi almost repeated Lancia's 1936 Augusta win when he was second behind a Fiat 600. However, the solidly built saloon Lancias had too stern a task in trying to defeat the highly tuned Alfa Romeo Giuliettas of that era, even when using the faster and lighter Zagato models. The V4 engine had basic technical limitations, but there were some excellent tuning jobs which brought power to over 65 horsepower, these units being capable of 6,000 RPM. Only in the Italian 1150cc class would Lancia Appias score victory after victory. In 1959, Verschbaumer took a national championship title with an Appia GT, and Cesare Fiorio repeated the feat in 1961 in a similar car. Mille Miglia results included Luciano Mantovani's 1957 class win with an Appia GT averaging 120 km per hour. In 1961, the event was staged as a rally, and Frescobaldi took an Appia GT into 9th overall. The most outstanding result of Appia origin were made by the arrival of Giancarlo Baghetti during 1959. The Italians had inspired Formula Junior, utilizing tuned production engines, and the idea proved very popular. Lancia tuning ace Angelo D'Agrada built a front-engine single-seater and tuned the Appia engine to 89 horsepower at 6,500 RPM, based on standard components. D'Agrada found the biggest power improvement in the cylinder head, and by redesigning the porting so that the engine had 2 intake and 2 exhaust ports each side, he was able to fit a pair of twin-choke Weber 40 DCO carburetors. Baghetti won the Formula Junior meeting at Monza in 1960, averaging just over 161 kilometers per hour, and also finished well in front at other events. The similar D'Agrada of Giorgio Bassi also proved very competitive. For 1961, D'Agrada developed a mid-engined Formula Junior car, which was made possible with a Flavia transmission. This car employed a 100 horsepower at 7,000 RPM version of the Appia engine, finally brought to 102 horsepower at 7,500 RPM with the aid of 4 megaphone exhausts. D'Agrada also devised a 995cc version giving 95 horsepower, but the unreliability of the car led to the disappearance of the D'Agrada after 1961. So the Appia was Lancia's most popular model in every respect, also the most sporty, until the introduction of the Fulvia. Yet despite this popularity, they were not regarded until much later as a thoroughbred in the same manner as the contemporary Alfa Romeo Giulietta. Nevertheless, they earned a reputation as one of the most reliable Italian cars of the decade. Appia quality was beyond criticism, and many 15-year-old Appias circulated in Italy during the 70s. A bit of rust or a puff of smoke, they are only signs of age. The economical Appia helped Lancia survive the difficult years after the Pesenti takeover in 1955. Also, it might have regained the money that was lost by the Flaminia.